Root of Nightmares, the new Lightfall raid in Destiny 2, has players pretty split. From discussions of its difficulty to the length of the raid, the mechanics, and even the art design, you're gonna see a lot of differing opinions. For sure the biggest is in regards to its difficulty, which according to Raid Report, Root of Nightmares has a total of 104,000 raid completions in the first 24 hours, compared to only 32,000 completions for Vow of Disciple during its first 24 hours. And the world's first team beat Root of Nightmares in 2.5 hours, with the last team in the top 10 being just over 3 hours. Again, compare that to Vow, where the world's first completion was a little over 7 hours, and the last team in the top 10 is sitting at 8.5 hours. With these stats in mind, it's led a lot of players to claim the raid is a bit too easy, with takes like, "I don't care what anyone says, Contest was not on during that raid. The health of the bosses needed to be doubled if not almost tripled." And players would go on to mock Bungie's quote about wanting Destiny 2 to bring back the challenge, then having this brand new raid be beaten so quickly and easily. And there is some legitimacy to the argument that's been made that Root of Nightmares might have been a little bit too light on the challenge, as the last time a world's first race was beaten in under 3 hours was Scourge of the Past in 2018. And that was before the days of the Contest Modifier, which significantly increases the difficulty for the first 24, now 48 hours. Now the counter-argument for why Root of Nightmares was so easy is brought up by these 2 points. 1, players are getting better and better at the game. The number of high-skilled players and how well they know the game's mechanics has only increased year after year. A lot of the teams that have gotten world's first in previous raids have now been surpassed by so many other teams. The competition is fiercer than ever. And the second point, we are stronger now than we ever have been. And this one might be a little bit debatable since the Lightfall update saw quite a few nerfs to a lot of powerful builds and a nerf to resilience, but even with those nerfs, we are still very strong. The power creep is still very real. So pairing power creep with the hardcore player base actively getting better day by day, sure, these points hold some weight, but they don't tell the whole story. So let's take a look at some hot takes regarding the difficulty. First up, Glad. Pros, visually amazing. Lots of movement in the encounters. Planet encounter was so dope. Cons, bosses had no DPS check. Main mechanic is almost too simple. Contest difficulty felt off, quick and easy. New raid was a blast for me, but I can see how it would be disappointing for hardcore people. I love it, but didn't feel the same sense of accomplishment as when I cleared Vow. Vow was a more intense day 1 raid, but Root of Nightmares will be more enjoyable in the long run for most people. Cool environment, pretty cool mechanics. Even if the final boss had basically no new mechanics, damage checks were way too easy, so it all came down to figuring out mechanics faster. Difficulty was very lacking. World's first was achieved in 2.5 hours, and multiple teams are doing low man challenges in Contest successfully. We are very powerful with our current abilities/builds. I think a lot of us are just surprised by the low level of difficulty and challenge for Root. Learning the mechanics became the only real factor in beating the raid for most teams, and staying alive or trying to be perfect at DPS checks weren't even an issue. And like Lucky said, low man challenges are being done with little problem, in contest mode. Pretty insane to see, and there's a lot of concern surrounding the ability to simply bypass mechanics by brute forcing your way through them for Nezarec. Skipping mechanics and brute forcing DPS through them is something that we saw in Last Wish for multiple boss fights in that raid, including the final boss, Riven. Players having the ability to do that on day 1 with the Contest Modifier doesn't bode too well for the future when Contest mode is turned off. Root of Nightmares might become the easiest raid in the game, but maybe that's not a bad thing, at least according to takes like this. Not every raid needs to take 20 hours and require you to remember 20 symbols. This raid was fun, will be easy to teach, and is kind of fast to get some cool loot for the future. It's a win for me. Root of Nightmares down. Great raid. Definitely a little on the easy side, but that's going to make it really replayable and chill, similar to Deepstone Crypt. I prefer Root over Vow to be honest. Vow's odd pacing outweighs its strong moments for me. Root is certainly the hold W, aka fast-paced, spiritual successor to Wrath of the Machine that I wanted, an action raid. Will be easy for LFG to get together and run through. Root certainly is fast and replayable, something that makes it easy day 1 maybe, but makes it very successful long term. Gathalion likening it to Wrath is a good comparison, because not only was Wrath just fast-paced, action-packed fun, like Root, but the world's first clear was also completed in 2 hours, which was much faster than its previous expansion raid, which was King's Fall, which like Vow, also took about 7 hours. But Wrath went on to be the far more popular and replayable raid compared to King's Fall. King's Fall Day 1 was far better than Wrath Day 1, not just because it was more difficult, but because the size and scale of it. It was a massive experience. But Wrath was just pure fun start to finish, and a bit shorter and easier to get through, and is now widely regarded as a top 3 raid of all time by many. So right now it looks like Root of Nightmares is on its way to aging very well in terms of replayability. But how are the other aspects of the raid? The art design, the story, weapons, armor, and bugs. Well, first, the art design. Everyone seems to be loving the aesthetics of the raid. A lot of people saying it's the most beautiful since Last Wish. And honestly, I think they're right. The Traveler's Light Blast basically mixed with the darkness of the pyramid made for some pretty fucked up but beautiful designs. But where there seems to be some debate on the artistic side is with the armor. What goes through the heads of these gear design devs? It's always just flat out ugly gear. I'm sorry, but this is the ugliest armor I have ever seen. By far the worst endgame armor I've seen in all my years playing Destiny. What on earth? Looks awful. So there's lots of complaints, many more just like these, but then again, there are some like this. That Warlock armor is so incredibly sick. I need it. I will not stop doing this raid until I've acquired every single piece of armor for all my characters. I love how unique the design is. Now I gotta say, I think this shit is atrocious. Probably the worst armor set in Destiny 2 yet, and that's really saying something because each year it seems like the designers try to outdo each other for who can make the ugliest armor sets. But I do gotta say I think this one takes the cake. However, some players have a more balanced take on it. This is what raid armor should aspire to be. Love it or hate it, it's unique. And when you see it, you'll know it's from a raid, and immediately which one. And you know what? This is true. It does stand out, and I will never forget that Root of Nightmares has the ugliest armor in the game. And I gotta agree with this take from Maximus. They didn't make one good armor set for Lightfall, aside from the Eververse set. The weapons are seeing a much better reception. The Raid Exotic Conditional Finality is getting a lot of praise for both its visual design and how strong it is, and the legendary weapons look like they kinda toss some crap on top of the existing gun models, but from the gameplay side of things, there's some pretty decent god rolls that are already becoming meta. Now narratively, this is another place where Root of Nightmares has people split again, with a lot of comments noting Root of Nightmares doesn't quite feel like it has a story, and that Nezarec seems like he was just used for the sake of having a villain for the raid, rather than doing his character justice. But others argue we knew so little about Nezarec in the first place that it doesn't really matter much. But there was one cool surprise in the way of the third encounter where we get to see the location where the witness was during the final cutscene in The Witch Queen. That was a pretty cool moment, but most players are still pretty confused about the story for Root of Nightmares, and are a bit disappointed. Bugs and glitches, there's a few like any raid, but one of the most frustrating aspects of the raid might not even be a glitch. It's another janky, inconsistent mechanic. According to Kujay, Root of Nightmares finally introduced a raid mechanic more buggy and inconsistent than the tether in Garden of Salvation. The demonic platform launchers in the second encounter. Literally never know what kind of momentum or trajectory you'll have after using them. Another thing players were expecting, or at the very least hoping for, was for something to open up or unlock after the completion of the raid, like what we've seen before for previous raids, but we didn't get really anything, except for a few random collectibles for a triumph. But speculation seems to point to Bungie initially having a new quest unlock for the exotic sidearm that would also lead to us unlocking the final strand abilities, but due to the backlash of the lack of content at release for Lightfall, Bungie decided to release that content early in order to appease the pissed off player base. Now it's an interesting theory, there's no way to know for sure if that's what happened, but it does seem kinda likely. Another thing that has players scratching their head is this scene or image from the trailers. This looks like a raid fly-in intro cinematic, but of course that's not the raid intro cinematic for Root of Nightmares, so players thought maybe it'd be for something else after the raid. But so far this cinematic doesn't actually exist in-game, and turned out to be nothing. But I want to hear your thoughts on the Root of Nightmares raid. Have you played it yet or not? And what are your thoughts on it so far? Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you all in the next one.